Alright, Python programming. You can either do it here on REPL.it, which is an online editor, or you can download one and configure something like Visual Studio Code or PyCharm, or there's plenty of other ones. These are called IDEs. These are actual software applications. It's simple enough for right now just to use the website because this has everything pre-installed on a server someplace. So what is Python? Python is a programming language. What is a programming language? A programming language is instructions you write to a computer based on keywords and variables and subroutines and methods and conditional logic. What does all that mean? Well, the best way to learn programming is to do it. So you start with the classic hello world right there. So in this single thing, so we're just going to run it, and what does it do? Sure enough, it says hello world. Amazing, right? So there's a lot of things going on here. So we'll start over. To comment something out in Python, every language has a different formatting for commenting, but in Python it's the £. So what's this first part? Print. So print is actually a reserved keyword, meaning you can't name a variable print. What's a variable? We'll get to that in a second. But what's important is these two little parentheses here. Anything with parentheses after it, that is a function. What that means is it takes input and exports some sort of output. So print is a built-in function into the Python language. What does print do? Well, thankfully we have what's called IntelliSense to tell us exactly what Python does. What print does. Print prints the value to a string, blah, 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 blah. What it basically does is print something to a console. So the thing to keep in mind at this very early level of development is every program you write is just going to pop into this console here. You're a long way from creating web applications or video games or stuff like that. Right now you're just trying to understand basic concepts of how do you create things and spit them out. Sometimes give it some input, spit out some output. That's really all every program that's ever been written is you give something input and it gives you output. So print is a perfect example. So if I wanted to print the number 1 and I push run, it gives me the number 1. Now this doesn't always work in every language because there's something called data types. So in order to understand data types, you need to understand what a variable is. A variable, by definition, is a placeholder in memory. What does that mean? That literally means basically like the Dewey Decimal System in libraries, it's a place where that value goes. So a variable is basically a book on a shelf someplace that has a value in it. The way Python works is you don't really even need to have any special word to define a variable. In most languages, you have some sort of prefix. In Visual Basic, it's dim. In C#, you have to say the exact data type, int x. But in Python, pretty much anything you don't specify, like as a reserved keyword, becomes a variable. So x, boom, we got ourselves a variable, x equals 1. And so we know a function takes in input and spits out output. In this case, the output is in the form of a blah 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 stream, which basically means it spits it to the console. So rather than typing something inside this function, these parentheses here, this is the input part, we can actually feed a function a variable, and suddenly we're able to print that number, nothing special there, over to the console. So we can do that with all sorts of stuff. Data types. There's an integer, which is basically any whole number. That's meaning a number without floating points, basically decimal points. Then there's strings. Strings is, I think you can use both. Yeah, you can use both single and double quotes. I prefer to use single quotes. Some people prefer double quotes. It doesn't really matter. I guess I'll use double quotes for now. I think that's a little bit more universal. So again, hello world. And so now when we print y, we get hello world printed out onto the console. So this is some basic programming. So we got hello world, and we can print the value of x. So what are we expecting? The number 1, and then the value of x, and then the value of y printed out onto the thing. So boom, we got it right there. So that's your first lesson.